Welcome back, everyone. Here's another guided reading video. This one's on 7.1, The French Revolution Begins. Okay, this guided reading is set up so that there's two big tables on your worksheet, and each of them has a big question, and then we look at four different things that help to answer that question. So the first question is, how did each of the following contribute to the revolutionary mood in France? And the first thing we're going to look at is the three estates. So this is the social structure in France, right? The first estate is the church, second estate is the nobility. Those are two of the estates, but they make up only 3% of the population. And then they also had several privileges, and we're going to talk about an example of one of those. Finally, you have the third estate. Those are the peasants. They make up 97% of the population, a huge amount of the population. Now, they could be farmers, they could be workers in the city, they could be merchants. So most of these people were pretty poor. Some of them did have a lot of money, though. However, it didn't matter how poor or rich the third estate was, they did not have the same privileges as the first and second estate. And here's an example of that. The first and second estate, they paid little to no taxes, while the third estate had to pay heavy taxes. And so this was a situation in which the third estate is not happy. They don't like the status quo. They don't think it's fair. They don't think it's right, and they're eager for change. You can see in this picture over here, it illustrates the third estate is that man hunched over with the hoe in the poor shabby clothes, and the first and second estate are pictured riding his back. You can see the first estate, the man with the cross on representing the church, and the second estate, the man with the sword representing the nobility. That poor shabby old man has got to hold up those other two men, and that's kind of a metaphor and illustration of how the third estate was paying taxes and the first and second estate were paying little to no taxes. In fact, the first and second estate were collecting taxes from the third estate as well. This is a picture of John Locke. You remember him from when we studied the Enlightenment. Enlightenment ideas definitely contributed to a revolutionary mood in France. There were lots of ideas going around about how government should be run. Ideas like direct democracy, people having a vote, people having a say, the social contract, how it's supposed to protect people's rights, and those natural rights which John Locke talked about, right? Life, liberty, and property. Third estate, particularly the educated third estate who knew how to read, started to question how King Louis XVI's government, an absolute monarchy, could rule over the people with all these new ideas going around. They were thinking, France should be going along with these new ideas to give us more rights. We have nothing. And so the third estate wanted more equality, more liberty. They wanted to incorporate some of these Enlightenment ideas into their government within France. Now, another thing that contributed to a revolutionary mood in France was an economic crisis. This was caused by quite a few different factors. So one of the factors is high taxes on the third estate. They're paying a lot of money out of pocket in order to pay for all the taxes that they have coming down on them, and that's really causing a severe pressure in terms of where a lot of their resources financially are going, is just to taxes. Another economic crisis is the fact that there's food shortages. There was a couple bad harvests over these years, which leads to a very high price in bread. It's going to affect the poor the hardest, but it's also going to, again, contribute to this economic crisis. There's also high government debt. Now, there's high taxes on the third estate, which is 97% of the population, but remember that the third estate also doesn't have most of the wealth. Most of the wealth is in the first and second estate. They're not paying taxes. So the government is collecting taxes from the poorest people, but it's having trouble paying for all the things that it spends its money on from this revenue from the peasants. And so the government's in very high debt at the time, and they're having trouble getting out of debt. In fact, they can't pay back most of their debts. They can hardly even pay the interest on their debts, let alone pay off the debts. There's also, though, not as much of a big factor as these other three. The fourth thing here is extravagant spending by the king and queen. They used to spend a lot of money on parties, and here's a great example of the Queen Marie Antoinette here with a very, very fancy dress in a very, very fancy place with very, very fancy hair. This all costs a lot of money, and this is all also contributing to the fact that the government is in debt and the fact that France is in an economic crisis. Fourthly, another thing that contributed to the revolutionary mood in France is weak leadership. Now, here's Louis the 16th. Louis the 16th, a lot of people said he was a good guy, he was a great family man, he really loved his children, but he is not a good leader. He's indecisive. He has trouble making decisions. Oftentimes, when he's got to make a major decision, his opinion is whatever the last person that spoke to him told him. He can't make his own mind up. He has trouble with that kind of thing. And so, because he has trouble making decisions, one of the things that he didn't deal with for a long time is this economic crisis in France. People are hungry. They can't afford bread. The taxes are so high. He's not taxing the first or second estate at all. And so, all these problems with this economic crisis, he doesn't even get around to dealing with it until it's too late, until people are demanding significant change. So the next question is, how did each of the following events lead to the French Revolution? So let's look first at the meeting of the Estates General. This is France's representative body. There's representatives from all the three estates. This doesn't meet all the time, only in this case in a crisis. So you know something big is going on when the king calls the Estates General to meet. The Estates General is often dominated by the clergy, by the first estate, and by the nobility, the second estate. But at this Estates General, the third estate is much more assertive. They talk about their grievances. In other words, these are the problems that the kingdom is having, and we need to fix them. They refuse to be dominated by the first and second estate. And so the third estate representatives that went to this had a lot of high hopes about fixing the problems in the country. They wanted to reform the tax system. They wanted to give people more rights in the third estate. They were sorely disappointed when they got to this meeting. The first and second estate were not going to give much ground, and the king did not want to give into the reforms of the third estate. And so they decide one of the ways that they're going to get some of the reforms to happen is to create the National Assembly. Now, the National Assembly is made up of mostly third estate people, but occasionally some people from the clergy would also become a member, or possibly some people from the nobility. And basically, this idea of creating this National Assembly was breaking away from the old structure of the Estates General. Instead of just falling in line like the third estate was supposed to, within the Estates General, they create a National Assembly, which is going to push for reforms and get change that the people need. A lot of times, this is seen as the start of the French Revolution, the establishment of the National Assembly within the Estates General. Now, the National Assembly is making lots of proposals, wanting lots of change. The king doesn't really like it. In fact, he dislikes what the National Assembly is doing so much that he locks the door to the Estates General meeting so that they can't come in and participate anymore. And this is when the National Assembly goes somewhere else in the Palace of Versailles, finds an indoor tennis court, as you can see pictured here, and they take an oath. They swear that they will not stop until France has a new constitution, until there are reforms made and changes made, because France really needs to be reformed. Eventually, the king gives in to their demands, so the National Assembly starts to gain some momentum. They're demanding changes, they're passing laws, they're passing legislation. They're saying, we represent 97% of the population. And so these laws that we're making represent what the country wants. And eventually the king starts to give in to some of those demands. Another event that leads to the French Revolution is the storming of the Bastille. The Bastille is in Paris. And with all this stuff going on with the National Assembly, the king is worried that people are getting more and more bold, that they're going to revolt against him. So Louis hires mercenaries. These are soldiers for hire that he pays for. They're not even French. They start to surround Paris. People in Paris are starting to get worried. They're worried that their momentum, that their National Assembly and all these changes that they're starting to pass, at least in law, are going to get cracked down upon, and that the king is going to send the soldiers into the city, take over the city, crack down the people violently if necessary to stop all these changes. So the people decide that they want to arm themselves, and they know where they can get gunpowder and weapons. It's in the Bastille. And so they go to the Bastille. The governor of the Bastille says, no, you can't come in. They storm it. They attack it with cannons and gunfire and knock down the doors and get inside. And once they're inside, the governor of the Bastille says, okay, we surrender. We won't fight anymore. The people don't stop. They kill him. They kill the guards. They cut off their heads. They put them on spikes and carry them around the city. And so this is the first precedent here of people who are angry, they want revolution, they want change, and as soon as someone gets in their way, even if they surrender at the end, they'll kill them violently and parade them around, and to show it starts to get pretty bloody. This is one of the violent turning points of the French Revolution. The symbolism of taking down the Bastille is that the people have taken away a great symbol of the king's power. At this time, there weren't that many political prisoners in the Bastille prison, but it didn't even matter because the Bastille basically symbolized how the king had absolute power, and if you went against the king, he could throw you in jail. The people not only took over the Bastille, but they tore it down. They eliminated this oppressive symbol of the king in order to show that, hey, King Louis, we are not going to sit around here and let you send in mercenary troops to crack down on us. Our voice is not going to be silenced. We want equality. We want change within the French government, and you have to give it to us. Okay, thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.